The story of melanated people here in America isn't one of triumph and justice, but rather a story of cruelty, oppression, and slavery. But these characteristics are the very same characteristics that have molded the most resilient group of people in the history of the world. A culture seemingly wiped away still evolved from the bowels of oppression to become the most dominant cultural influence on the face of the earth. Lost in the years of oppression is the hidden true history of these illustrious people, and hidden within that lost history is the identity of who these people truly are. Unable to be hidden, the truth reveals itself within the area between the lines in the words of history. The path to truth is being blazed through our understanding of the past. History didn't begin for these people in 1492. However, the pages of history have conveniently forgotten who these people were, or more accurately, misrepresented these people and concealed their true identity. Europeans have always differentiated policies from country to country and consistently warred amongst themselves for centuries. But when it came to the oppression of melanated people in America, there was universal agreement. Exploitation by any means to the ultimate goal of domination. But these copper tribes from America would not allow themselves to be dominated. Contrary to historical perspective, Black Indians had courageously defended their homes for centuries throughout the period of Euro colonialization in America. And it wasn't until Europeans had infected over half the population with disease that the natives would start to lose control of their own land. Yet, it still took over half of Europe's enemies working together to obtain any military control of the land. After centuries of campaigns by the French, the Spanish, the British, and even the Dutch, Europeans would finally gain control of the land. The spoils of war go to the conqueror. Along with those spoils, the conqueror's narrative of history. And the stolen past is repackaged and reappropriated in whiteface. It is understood without doubt that Europeans were the sworn enemies of these black Indians. But Europeans wouldn't be their only opposition. This European domination doesn't happen without the help of other tribes, which is exactly why the pages of history only picture a certain type of American Indian. Some tribes sold other tribes out. For fear of domination, they bowed under the sword of Jesus to ensure their survival. These were the tribes that sided with colonialists during battle and also participated in the slavery of black natives. This group of natives were even employed by Europeans as guides and slave catchers. As Europeans rolled the dice in the game of divide and conquer, certain tribes would even help those Europeans raid other tribes and capture and sell any captive to a conquistador. Rival nations descended into back and forth wars of payback, revenge, and retaliation. Destructive battles fostered at the hands of white Europeans. Even the tribes who helped the colonialists were eventually robbed from most of their land during Western expansion and relegated to reservations. Some of those reservations as small as a concentration camp. Any tribe that sided with colonialists was guaranteed some remnants of cultural sustainability. Any other people were disintegrated, stolen, and suppressed into oblivion.
Okay, before we get to the Treaty of 1866, let me ask you this. What about when the Civil War came? How did that affect what was going on in the Indian Territory?
Okay, because the 5 tribes engaged in slavery. From the time that they got here in the early 30s or the mid 30s, they engaged in slavery here in Indian territories. So when the Civil War came in 1861, the 5 tribes, took up arms against the U.S. and fought for the South during the Civil War. They committed treason, basically, and fought for the South, and fought it up until it ended, or until the war ended in 1865.
Okay, so then after the war ended, and now we're talking about the treaty that was signed in 1866. So tell us about that.
Okay, because the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution did not apply to Indian territories because Indian territories were not part of the United States. So when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, it didn't apply to us. It really didn't apply to the southern states because the southern states had basically had seceded from the U.S. So when he was speaking of the Emancipation Proclamation, he was basically talking to the northern states that he had control over. So when Grover Granger sailed into Galveston Harbor in 1865 to reveal to the Texans that slavery had ended, the Civil War was over, the North had won, that Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation back in 1863. He was not talking to the slaves of the 5 civilized tribes here in Indian territories at that time. He was only talking about the slaves in the United States of America. Well, after slavery ended in the United States of America, the U.S. did not want slavery to be practiced in their backyard. So as a result of that, they got together with the chiefs of each respective tribe and brought them to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and they came to an agreement with the treaties of 1866, and each tribe agreed. They agreed to free their slaves, to make them citizens or give them equal rights, and with rights comes citizenship, or citizenship is synonymous to rights and benefits. And they had 2 years to do it. And the U.S. gave each tribe $300,000 to do it. Then they had to do it within a period of 2 years. Well, the Cherokee and the Creeks did it right away, and the Seminoles, they did it right away. The Choctaws didn't do it until 1885. They stalled and stalled and stalled, and they finally adopted their freedmen, who were descendants of slaves. They did it in 1885. The Chickasaw Nation never did adopt. They continued and drug it out and fought it up until Oklahoma statehood.
Okay, so what we're talking about with this treaty is then giving the freedmen and their descendants the rights, whatever rights that will be afforded to those 5 tribes by the United States. By this treaty, we feel should then be passed down to the descendants of the freedmen.
Yes, because citizenship is an inherited state of being. Once you get citizenship, your citizenship is passed down from kid to kid to kid. It's an inherited state of being. So if my great-great-grandmother was a citizen, if she was a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, for an example, in 1866, I should be a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation today. It's that way, it's reflected that way with the white Indians on the white side, because in essence, with our federal tax dollars, we are supporting the descendants of our former slave masters.
Slavery amongst the 5 civilized tribes in some cases was different than that of European chattel slavery. Slaves or captives held in bondage by tribes over time could become a member after a stint of punishment and indentured servitude. Some would replace fallen members in battle. Still, in some cases, prisoners would be sacrificed in rituals and tortured. The natives were effectively doing the Europeans' jobs themselves. For the tribes who assimilated into European culture, their complexion would change, along with their ideology concerning the supposed inferiority of dark-skinned people. Dark-skinned slaves represented the majority of all people in bondage, therefore making it an easy transition to reclassify an American Indian into a Negro or other slave. For generations, the Mongoloid tribes admixed with the European population. This hybrid of the two races would eventually become the face of a Native American. The Aboriginal tribes have been eradicated due to disease, war, or captivity, and the only free tribes were heavily assimilated into European bloodlines. At this point, the remaining tribes would start to enact their own versions of white supremacy, retroactively banning any Negro or dark-skinned Indians from becoming tribal members through the requirement of birth records dating back 3 to 5 generations. Although many dark-skinned Indians had oral records, very few could produce the paperwork. Black Indians were reclassified out of recognition and abandoned by the very same tribes that they once ruled. These newly recognized tribes resembled nothing of the true past of real Native Americans, and these confederations were created to further whitewash history with Eurocentric lies.
We are going. We too will run to Canada.
You, not I.
No. Give me a rifle. Let me fight.
You must go.
I'm afraid.
It is a journey you must make alone. It is a dangerous journey. It is a risk we must take for Tiwiwas. I do not know what will happen. Maybe they will hang me. Maybe they will lock me in a prison. What then? Once I was a great chief. I made the decisions. Now the white man makes them for me.
Indian Affairs, Laws and Treaties, Volume 2. Treaty with the Cherokee, 1866, Article 4. All Cherokees and free persons who were formerly slaves to any Cherokee, and all free Negroes not having been such slaves who resided in the Cherokee Nation prior to June 1st. This prior statement establishes that whoever was a slave was entirely fluid and was not dependent on race. It also established that all or some free Negroes had never been slaves. Leslie Ross has been denied citizenship in the Cherokee Nation on the grounds that he's truly not Indian. Quote, "They say I don't have any Indian blood. They say blacks never had any part of Cherokee Nation," says Ross in his usually calm voice, swelling with anger. Quote, "The thing is, there wouldn't be a Cherokee Nation if it weren't for my great-grandfather. Jesus, he was more Indian than the Indians." end quote. Ross is at least one of 25,000 direct descendants of freedmen who cannot join Oklahoma's largest tribes. Once paragons of racial inclusion and assimilation, the Native American sovereign nations have done an about-faced and systematically pushed out people of supposed African descent. There's never been any stigma about intermarriage, says Stu Phillips, editor of the Seminole Producer, a local newspaper in central Oklahoma. You've got Indians marrying whites, Indians marrying blacks. It was never a problem until they got some money, end quote. These are boom times for the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, due in no small part to the 1988 Indian Gambling Regulatory Act that allowed the tribes to construct their own casinos. The Chickasaws' net assets have more than doubled to $315 million in the 2 years since it opened the Mammoth Windstar Casino Complex in Thackerville. The corporate arm of Cherokee Nation is on track to make nearly $70 million this year thanks to a new casino in Catoosa. Then there's the Government Reparations Fund. In 1990, the Seminoles received $56 million in a settlement as compensation for the seizure of the tribe's ancestral homelands in Florida almost 200 years ago. Rick Kittles is one of the last speakers at the Descendants Conference. He steps up to address the crowd. He speaks briefly about the underlying science. He describes how African genealogy is relatively easy to trace because of the population's high number of polymorphisms, genetic variations unique to a particular group. Then he gets down to business. He shows charts indicating that African ancestry in the 95 freedmen he tested ranged from 4 to 76%. While European ancestry varied from 0 to 62%. Native American was surprising, Kittle says as he presses the slide clicker to bring up the figures that everyone's waiting for. The range of Indian blood was from 0 to 30% for an average of just 6%, almost identical to an East Coast African American population. The chatter in the crowd stops. Kittles is telling attendees that genetically they are no more Indian than blacks in New York City or Baltimore. I expected it to be higher because of the experiences you've had, he admits. Then he offers a consolation. He explains that many freedmen displayed high levels of European ancestry with the group average at 18%. He suggests that ironically, this might be exactly what links them to the 5 civilized tribes. Indians, he explains, were in contact with white colonists starting in the 17th century, and there has been significant gene flow between the two groups. As a result, many people who identify themselves as Native American have very high percentages of European DNA. East Coast African Americans show much weaker links to Europe. So the freedmen's levels of white genetic material may be in fact the very proof of Indianness that they're looking for. Dr. Kittles asserts that the European DNA found in black freedmen could be their possible link to Native Americans. He goes on to state that certified Native American tribal members are no more Indian than black people in New York and Baltimore. He leaves out an interesting tidbit of information, however. Since the blacks are aboriginal to this land and government-certified Indians have no more native blood than the average black person, why haven't you analyzed the DNA of black Americans and cross-referenced it against other groups? Because that information would not correlate with the falsified history about melanated Americans all being from Africa. But why would Dr. Kittles lie? Because he is the CEO of AfricanAncestry.com.